Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Leggett submits a new $5.1 billion budget. As crossover day appears, what is your assessment of Governor Hogan? And what are the remaining hot topics being debated in Annapolis? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the past president of the Montgomery County branch of the NAACP, Henry Hailstock, attorney and former Republican candidate for County Executive, Jim Shalleck, Republican National Committee woman for Maryland, Nicolee Ambrose, and former head of the Maryland Democratic Party and political consultant, Rich Parsons. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. County Executive Isaiah Leggett released his recommended fiscal year 16 operating budget to the County Council this week. The $5.1 billion budget includes an overall increase of 1.3%, which is the smallest increase since the recession years. And more importantly, no new taxes. Henry, at first look, there would appear to be much to like from this budget that increases school funding $30.7 million to $2.2 billion, gives employees a 2% pay raise without raising taxes. Yet Mr. Leggett has said that not everyone will be pleased with his plan. What's not to like?
Well, there are several things not to like. First of all, you look at what they gave Montgomery College. They said that's fine, they appreciate the increase, but it's not enough, and they eventually have to increase the tuition, which is going to be a hardship for a number of the students who probably would have to drop out or not come into getting a higher education. The other aspect of it is that he did promise that 2.5% of the property tax would go toward increasing the affordable housing. That is not going to happen now because it's falling short, way short. And we're already short in having affordable housing. The other aspect of it is you look at what they're doing with the education. The school board didn't get quite as much as they anticipated. Now, I give the school system props for anticipating a shortfall and starting to tighten the belt, but it's still increasing classroom.
But here's the problem. We had a 7.4% increase, followed by a 4% increase, followed by a 3% increase. How many more increases can the taxpayer afford? Isn't that the real issue here? Is that the taxpayers need a break?
Well, I mean, all of us would say we need a break from getting money from our pockets. However, you look at the increase that the school system is going to have for this coming year. They say 150 new students. However, I guarantee you toward the end of the school year and beginning of the next year, it's going to be far more than that. So we have to keep up with that.
Henry,
where the money going to come from?
$5 billion budget.
It's still, you still look at what is needed. It's not going to happen.
All right, I want to go to Jim on this. Jim, the school system did not get an increase as large as it asked for, and as a result will have to make some personnel cuts, and warns that it may have to increase class sizes. What do you think about the budget proposal, particularly for the schools?
Well, Casey, the school system gets $2.3 billion. That's a lot of money. That's billion with a B. Ike Leggett, I ran against Ike Leggett.
There's 156,000 students.
Exactly. But let me say 2.3 billion. Look, I ran against Ike Leggett, and criticizing him about education spending is unfair. Ike Leggett's number one priority has always been education, and to attack him on not giving them enough money, that's not fair to Ike. He's their best friend. But let me tell you this, the school budget, in my opinion, there's too much bureaucracy. There's waste in that school budget. If they can't make it due on $2.3 billion, then maybe we need some changes in the administration.
Well, so, Henry, what do you think about that?
Well, I think he's right in that aspect for administrators, but I'm going to the classrooms. So if they're passing the buck down to the classroom, then I really have a problem because class sizes are increasing.
You know, almost $20,000 per student, Henry.
It is not enough considering what they need to do because we're far behind with the people of color getting a proper education in this system. And looking at the increase in people of color in Montgomery County, and we have to, as employers, have to hire these people, we have a problem. When they're graduating with a 7th grade reading and math education.
Henry, if we're spending $20,000 per student, it's not for lack of funding.
it's I agree on one hand because we're not hiring enough good teachers. And when I say good teachers, teachers that are understand the student of today, because the color of this nation is going to change and we have to get over it. You look at Montgomery County and in our system and what we need to do, we need teachers that understand students and what their needs are and work toward their needs, not just going off and just saying this is the education, this is it, and not looking at what is needed for the student.
All right, Nicolee.
And we need an education system that is colorblind. You should have an amazing education in this country regardless of the color of your skin. And we're going to get to this, but the best way to do that is school choice. And the other thing I have to say, hearing all of this talk of we need more money and a 7% increase and a 4% increase and a 3% increase, why can the government not live like we have to individually run our households? It is our money they're using for all of this. And for them to take $20,000 from us to educate our children and then have students that aren't prepared to enter the workforce is totally unacceptable.
Now you're going on management, and I've always said they need to run the schools like they run a business.
I agree with that.
But they
I
don't.
want to get Rich in here.
Well, Henry's just touching on the point I was going to make. We don't run our schools like you would run a business. You run a business where it's an old axiom in management, you perform to what you measure. Well, all we measure in Maryland in our school system is how much money goes into the system. Right. That's really the only thing, the whole maintenance of effort laws, everything, it's all built around increasing the amount that we spend. And I would say, I think our school system does a pretty good job, but when you come into tough financial times and you have to make tough budget decisions, it's really hard with the opacity of this school system's budget. Our system is the county council is responsible for giving them the money, but we never quite know how much is being wasted on administrative overhead that isn't really essential to reducing class sizes, Henry said. We don't know because it's a black box. We never really see as taxpayers what's actually in that school budget.
The only thing
and I think there probably is some waste in there or some inefficiency
the only thing
that isn't central to great outcomes.
The only thing
and that's what we
disagree
should
with
be
you
measuring
on,
is outcomes.
They measure something else too.
Well, they measure test scores. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that is incorrect from the standpoint of how they're teaching. All right? They're not teaching so that they can apply. They're teaching so that they can put down on paper, and which is a big difference.
Jim,
you have to work toward that.
I want to get Jim in.
Casey, about 90% of the school budget goes to benefits and salaries. A teacher in Montgomery County does very well. They deserve it. So there's no excuse for poor teachers.
Well, you're right. They have a nice. The other problem that's facing the school system is we're rudderless. We have no superintendent, and we're not going to have another superintendent for a long period to come. When we come back from the short break, we're going to turn our attention to Annapolis as the General Assembly begins to wind down. Stay tuned. And welcome back. There may be a crisis brewing in the Maryland General Assembly as both the Maryland House and Senate voted this week on budgets which include significant cuts to Governor Larry Hogan's $40.7 billion budget. These budgets that were passed by the General Assembly restores full funding for education and pay raises for state workers and a $75 million reduction in the state's employee pension fund. Hogan received help this week, however, from an unlikely ally when the Washington Post editorialized that Mr. Hogan seems to have succeeded in persuading lawmakers to accept other cuts to close the state's long-term structural deficit. But if he stands aside while legislators raid the pension fund again, his victory will be Pyrrhic. The Post then went on to add and to describe the actions of the legislators. The lawmakers' intentions aren't evil, only craven. That's pretty harsh criticism, Rich. Hogan was elected because he campaigned on one issue, the high cost of government, the high cost of taxes, and of course the rain tax. And now the House and the Senate committees seem not to have gotten that message.
Well, I think the Post is on to something. I think the job of an elected leader is to lead, and sometimes that means doing what's tough now to avoid a bigger problem in the future. And the legislature seems to have taken a big step away from that kind of approach. Everybody knows the pension system that bill is going to come due, and we're going to have to pay it. And every year that we shortchange the funding of that pension system, we're asking for a problem. So, I think this is a mistake on the legislature's part, and I would rather see responsible budgeting that deals with the issues we know we're going to have to deal with in a time when the remedies aren't so drastic. If we keep kicking this can down the road, we're going to have a major problem, and it's not going to be easy. I think it's just too easy for politicians to just say, oh, I might be out of office by then, so why worry? I don't think it's terribly responsible behavior.
All right, so Nicolee, does this pose a classic power struggle between the two Mikes, Mike Miller and Mike Bush, and the newly elected Governor Larry Hogan? Will he dare to veto this budget?
That's a great question, and I just don't have the answer to that yet. However, I agree with you, Rich. How can any governor, especially Larry Hogan was elected for fiscal responsibility, right? And we know whether it's 70% of voters who wanted to get rid of the rain tax or whatever topic it is, people across the board gave him a mandate. He won by 5% to say, please get the state spending in line. And so the biggest hook here, right, is that employee pension fund. Because how can you go in and keep looting bills that we are responsible for? We're obligated for that as a state. So I would think that would be the issue that's going to give him pause.
Well, it's Jim.
Well, Casey, Larry Hogan ran on, less taxes, get away with the rain tax, and he's implementing what he promised.
Right.
This is a politician that is governing as he promised in the election, and that's why he won. For a Republican to win in Maryland is a huge story. And he did it because of what he's
Have you
doing.
forgotten who runs the Maryland State Senate? It's King Mike Miller. This is all about the power struggle between the two Mikes and the governor as to who's going to set the message for the upcoming remainder of the Hogan term. This is exactly what they did with Ehrlich. They gave a little and then they smashed him.
Well, the people are not going to be happy with that.
Yeah.
They elected Larry Hogan, and if his agenda is constantly defeated, that's going to hurt the Democrats at the polls, I believe.
I agree in some regards to Jim, but I think it's primarily the people are tired of what's going on, and that's why they elected Hogan, and it's going to show in this upcoming election as well, because we need to have somebody fiscally responsible. We need somebody that is going to manage, and I use that term again, manage our money well, and make sure that we have proper education, proper housing, and a proper administration going out in Maryland and in the state.
Well,
period.
I think what's going to happen is that the people really don't care unless their taxes are going up, and then they get angry. And if with this smoke and mirrors that's going on, that taxes aren't going to rise this increase, they're not going to care. It's not going to hit their radar.
Don't underestimate them, because some of them are tired already.
Yeah,
right,
I think
Rich?
they do care when they see other states seeming to come back from the recession a lot stronger than Maryland is.
Right.
And when we see continued failure to make the kind of investments that would actually grow our tax base instead of constantly raising people's tax rates.
You guys are dreaming.
And let's not be Detroit or Illinois.
All right, I want to focus on some of the hot topics that are remaining that do have to be decided. And there are other hot topics being debated in Annapolis as proposals from the first-term governor. The repeal of the rain tax we've been talking about, and there's been some action on that today. An expansion of the charter schools, and whether ex-felons should have the right to vote before their sentences have been completed. Nicolee, let's start with you. What do you think of the governor's proposal to expand charter schools in the state of Maryland?
As you could tell from the previous segment, I am all for anything that gives more school choice. I want it for parents. I want it for students. Personally, my children go to a magnet school. It's the top performing magnet school in the state of Maryland, and the superintendent of that school district is after the school to try to shut it down. We have 200-person wait list per classroom. I think charter schools are like this. We've seen it in D.C. Maryland has approximately 50 charter schools. Most of them are in Baltimore City, and we know parents love it, kids love it, and for the most part, they get outstanding results. Give people that option. It's their money. You're taking their tax dollars. Let them choose the best way to educate their children.
I know Henry doesn't agree with you. So Henry, what do you think?
You use D.C. as an example, and I'm glad you did, because you only look at a couple of charter schools that are exceptional.
I'm looking at the mothers who cried because their children could not get that amazing education.
I can
chance in
understand
life.
that. I can understand that, and that is needed. I've seen charter schools in other cities, New York, Chicago, that work very well and have been publicized on the news. However, my problem is that we're struggling now in public education to get the right money in the right place for the students to come out correctly. And
So
charter
speaking
schools
of-
will take away from public funding, and as they should. And no,
Henry,
but
I want-
if,
wait a minute,
if,
I wanna ask
if you're
Henry a
going to
question.
have, and let me just say this, if you're going to have a charter school, make sure you have the administration well enough to make sure that they're managed
Okay.
correctly and what have you. Because I've been exposed to 2 charter schools that one they had me on the board. I got off it because they weren't managing it correctly, and the students were not getting the proper
Those are-
education.
those are
The
all
other one-
fair- those are all
the other
fair
one, was
comments.
closed down, and they had to get rid of the principal and the administration to reopen and get something there properly to manage
All right,
and
but
to have.
how do you spur and how do you incentivize your public school system to perform better? We just talked about the fact that many of the public school systems here in Montgomery County in particular are overstaffed. They're overstaffed administratively,
Oh,
and
okay.
they're not providing the incentive for the students to learn. And that's where the difference is with charter schools,
I'm
is
glad
that the
you-
parents want their children to learn.
I'm glad you asked that question. I can answer it in this term: that which is not measured is not done. And that's what the problem that we have in public school systems, most of the public school systems, because each of the schools are not measured the way they should be. And how they should be is the students coming out, just like a product in a store, a product in a manufacturing plant. It comes out well, okay, and not have recalls.
Wait a minute. Well, look, we're going to have to wrap this up. We're not going to spend the whole segment talking about charter schools, so I'll let you have the last word.
Well, just quickly, there ought to be room in any school system for innovation, and I think at their
Yes.
best, charter schools can provide a little bit of experimentation, but they do open up the management issues that Henry is raising. So there's got to be the right balance here.
I'm
All
sorry,
right,
but Henry gave the answer to this question. It's business versus education, 2 different topics. You manage something well, you give people the choice.
Okay, I'm glad I gave Rich the last word. All right, thank you. Jim, we talked about the fact that the rain tax may be repealed, and the Senate voted today. Should the rain tax be repealed?
Oh, yes, and that's why Larry Hogan is governor. That was his main issue. And Friday, the state Senate voted 46-0 to make it not mandatory anymore. In other words, it's not mandatory for the counties to impose the rain tax on people. So, in my view, it's a win.
Okay, tell me why it was a win
Because
if
it's not
if the
mandatory.
counties don't repeal the tax themselves.
Well, if they don't, the shame on them. It's going to hurt. The people are going to be upset.
But they're not going to repeal that tax, are they? Are they, Rich? They're not going to repeal that tax here in Montgomery County because we love our taxes in Montgomery County.
I can't speak to Montgomery County's decision, but frankly, it is a win because it's a step away from this one-size-fits-all Big Brother approach by the state mandating it all. Now each county can decide for itself whether it's going to pay
It's
for
a
these.
shell game, and you guys are
Every
falling
county
for it.
can now decide whether they want to keep this rain tax, which is deeply unpopular, or do something else. You know, I'm all for loosening up the mandates. The county's in a better position to figure out how to fix their stormwater management. They're going to be better at it than the state. So it's good.
And if Montgomery
Give 'em some
County had a
freedom.
two-party system, you'd be in a much better
Oh,
position to
wait,
listen to voters
and
on
if
the rain
pigs
tax
could
and
fly.
get rid of it.
All right, we got a short time left. I do want to introduce this topic. We may not be able to spend a lot of time on it. Henry, should ex-felons have the right to vote restored before their sentence is over?
Yes, I do believe, because they have finished the preponderance of their sentence, and they should be allowed to vote. They should be allowed to vote even if they were in jail, as some states have already have allowed their incarcerated victims to do. The big issue that I think a lot of people have is that think that recidivism is connected to all of this, which it is not. It is training those individuals while they're incarcerated to come out ready to be employed, and that's the issue. And
Henry,
having
this isn't
people
about
employed.
employment. This is about paying their debt to society and whether they should have their full rights restored before they've completed their sentence. They haven't completed their sentence.
But once,
and there is a
once
recidivism rate.
a person is in jail
high
and
recidivism rate.
has shown that they have repented, have pay for their society, and they're given
No,
probation. They should be allowed to
necessarily.
come out
They could
as
have been
citizens
released
to do it.
because of overcrowding.
Well,
you got 30 seconds.
Just to be clear, this proposal in Maryland isn't to give felons who are still in prison the right to vote, and I don't think I would go that far. It's basically if they are out on parole or probation, that's the issue. Right now, they're not allowed to, and I think that's a reasonable step. They're making one step back into society.
Right.
Henry's right. We've got to
We got to wrap this up because we're getting the signal. We're going to spend more time on this next week because this is a topic that deserves more than a 2-minute segment. When we come back, stay tuned for Parting Shots. Now with Parting Shots, Henry Hailstock.
Yes, in the news, you've probably heard of the UVA student that was really battered by the police there, the ABC police officers who have full police rights to arrest anyone for anything. I think they overstepped their bounds. I think that this police brutality shows that we need to reel some of these people in who are police officers and are handling people of color in the wrong manner. Let's work on that, people, because we're hearing too much of this happening in the news.
Thank you, Henry. Jim Shalleck, your parting shot.
Well, Casey, as you know, I practice law, and I would say in the last year or so, more and more parents have come to me and young people with legal problems, and a lot of it is due to heroin addiction. That's unbelievable. We're not talking pot or cocaine, heroin. And some of my clients, these young kids, they're 16, 17, and they're addicted to heroin. It's a horrible problem, and I think we really have to, as the governor has made it a priority, parents, teachers, educators, got to keep a close eye on our children from odd behavior, because heroin is seeping into our society, and it's a terrible problem.
Thank you, Jim. Nicolee, Ambrose, your parting shot.
I want to go abroad to Malaysia and give a shout out to my fellow Johns Hopkins alum Nurul Issa Anwar, who is the vice president of her party and a member of parliament. She was arrested for sedition for quoting her father in parliament. Fortunately, she was released, but we as the international community need to continue to pressure countries like Malaysia to allow for different opinions and for people to share their views.
Thank you, Nicolee. Rich, your parting shot.
Well, transportation has been in the news a lot with the debate over the Purple Line in the down county part of Montgomery and into Prince George's County. But one of the things that's not getting enough attention is some of the transportation needs up county. And specifically, the Quarter Cities Transitway is chugging along through the design process. And some big news happened this week that I just want to call attention to. A long-delayed study that has identified a preferred alignment for the Mid-County Highway, which is a critical project that has a lot of people in the up-county very, very excited and interested. The county has chosen the master plan alignment as its preferred alternative, and that report just came out this week. So we finally seem to also be moving forward up county, and we need to be moving this whole county forward to make our transportation system work, not just the down county.
Thank you, Rich. I want to thank everyone for being here. Hopefully this is the last snowy day that we have to get together and that we're going to be in springtime. And of course, we also hope that the Terps go all the way and win the Final Four. I want to thank everybody for being here. And remember to tune in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.